This morning, the Premier received a letter from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce urging the government not to proceed with their scheme to rip up the contract with the beer store. Why is the Finance Minister so committed to this reckless and senseless scheme?
The deal is terrible for the consumers, it is killing competition, it is keeping prices high, and it is stifling our craft brewers. There is no deal like this anywhere else in the world. It is a sweetheart deal that rewards only the beer store and their near monopoly.
Ontario's plan to cancel its contract with the beer store has left a bitter taste in the mouths of some businesses on both sides of the border. The provincial government wants to break the contract so beer can be sold in corner stores, but both the Ontario and U.S. Chambers of Commerce have written letters to Premier Doug Ford to say that walking away from contracts looks bad to investors. Here's a bit more about that particular contract with the beer store. The beer store was created in 1927, owned then by 33 Ontario brewers, but today it's primarily owned by 3 multinational brewing giants, and they operate over 445 outlets across the province. The previous Liberal government signed a new 10-year contract with the beer store back in 2015, and it included a significant reform to allow hundreds of grocery stores to also sell beer, with some caveats. They can only sell 6-packs, 1/5 of grocery store beer sales must be craft beer, and grocery stores can't exceed collective annual sales of $450 million. Otherwise, a penalty is paid to the beer store. The contract ensures the beer store controls most of Ontario's $3.6 billion beer market. That's why, to cancel the contract, beer industry insiders say it could cost Ontario up to $1 billion. Ontario has tabled legislation to end the contract. The beer store says it will legally challenge the move. So why are businesses worried about the outcome? Rocco Rossi is the president and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. He joins us now from Toronto. Hi, Mr. Rossi. Great to see you.
Great pleasure to be on the show, Vashi.
You wrote a letter to the Ontario Finance Minister calling the proposal to cancel the beer store contract, or at least the message that it sends, alarming. Why for you is it alarming?
Look, we at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce are for more consumer choice and for more competition and for a modernized system of distribution of alcohol in the province of Ontario, but not at the expense of protecting contracts, and particularly sending a message that a government can unilaterally cancel a contract, and not only cancel it, but cancel it without penalty, because the signal that sends will make it very difficult for businesses to decide to do business with the government of Ontario going forward.
Have you heard that from your members? I want to put to you in a second what the government is saying in response, but
have
you heard that specifically from your members?
We've heard specifically from our members, and today you also had a letter to Premier Ford from the United States Chamber of Commerce, which represents over 3 million businesses south of the border, who are also encouraging the government to take another look at this and to not move back on what has been quite a strongly open for business agenda, what the Premier has been priding himself on, and rightfully so, on a number of great measures. This is a definite step backwards if it proceeds.
So the government says this is in line with their messaging, and I want to read you a portion of what Minister Fedeli wrote today in response to your concerns and the concerns specifically also from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The Liberals signed a sweetheart deal that tied the hands of small business owners across this province. A deal like this should never have been signed, period. Our parliamentary system ensures that a new government is not bound by a bad deal signed by a previous government that hurts the people of Ontario. Your response?
Look, let's make the government an NDP government in the future, and if we have a precedent set whereby unilaterally a government can decide it is not in the interest of the people of Ontario, it's a sweetheart deal, and can both tear up the contract and not provide any compensation, why would a company ever want to get into business with the government of Ontario that extends beyond the term of an existing government? And that's going to make things extremely not business-like and extremely expensive, Because imagine if you're asked to invest in a major project, put the money up front, you have to get the return on your investment. If this becomes the precedent and the way that governments can act in the future, you have to get your return within the mandate of that government. That's going to make sourcing foreign and domestic investment with the government extremely expensive.
I take your point on breaking the contract for sure, but do they have a point in describing the nature of the deal as a bad one?
Look, at protecting contracts is a little bit like being protective of free speech. Your firmness in principle is not tested when something is super good and no problems. It's tested when it's at the edges. We could argue with a number of the elements within the existing contract. That said, it was legitimately entered into by the government of Ontario of the time, and that has to be respected. And if you're going to tear it up, then compensation will accrue, and it'll either happen through the contract, it'll happen in the courts in Canada, or it will happen through the World Trade Organization and any dispute resolution mechanism we have in the new USMCA. So this cannot be done tears-free.
What's the ask of the government right now? Just to stop saying that they're going to tear up the deal, or to stop saying that they will somehow have legislation that allows them not to pay a penalty?
I think a message of unilateralism on the part of governments to tear up contracts with no compensation is a very bad message to send, and is against the principle and direction that this government thus far has followed incredibly well in making Ontario more open for business. And we at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce have been among the first to salute and congratulate the government when it comes out with good and important legislation and regulatory changes. This isn't one of them.
I was going to ask you, because I think I remember seeing you at least at one announcement or a forum that the Premier was doing where he was talking about that very message. And I'm wondering if you've had a chance to personally make any kind of appeal on this issue.
Look, we have enormous respect for the desire to make Ontario more open for business. We love what was done with respect to Bill 47, with Bill 66, increased competition, opening up Ontario for business, having a deputy minister specifically focused on the reduction of red tape. All of those are great messages, but what you're hearing both from us and from the United States Chamber of Commerce today is that this proposed step is out of step with that direction and would send an alarming and unfortunate message to investors, both foreign and domestic.
I guess I'm just wondering if you've received any response from the government outside of what's being playing out in the media.
We continue to have conversations at all levels of government.
Any optimism? I mean, they seem to be digging in their heels on this one. This seems to be something, I mean, you saw the tweets this weekend in the corner stores. This is a message that they want out there. Any optimism on your part that they could change their mind?
I'm an eternal optimist.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Rossi. Appreciate your time today. Welcome back to Power and Politics with the Power Panel, David, Tim, Kathleen, and Aaron. More fallout over the Ontario PC government's plans to kill a 10-year contract with the beer store that prevents the government from getting beer and wine into corner stores across the province. Today, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce weighed in, warning it would send the wrong message to international investors about how business is conducted in Ontario. Tim, I'll start with you.
Okay, I need 15 minutes to explain my beer role. So I'm a small brewer owner in Ontario, part owner, and I'm also doing some work with, or our company is with the Convenience Store Association, who's all for the democratization of beer. Now that I got that out of the way, a few points on this, Vashi. This is a big strategic game that's being played right now. I think the Ford government wants to bring the hammer down quite heavily on the big brewers, and they're, of course, the three who control the beer store. before. They do that by creating this legislation. Whether it will ever be enacted or not, I don't know. But it does force a move. Whether you're in the business or you're not in the business, you have to look at that contract and wonder why it was ever signed for a 10-year period. It's hard on new entrants. There are arguments that...
Don't worry, Kathleen, you're next. I see your face, your head is exploding right now.
She's getting wound up. I know. It's about to pop through. I'm not sure I buy the arguments that there'd be 7,000 job losses and not. People are still going to buy beer. The whole point of, I think, what the Ford government is trying to do is to put it in more locations and give people a greater opportunity to do that. The one thing that I would say was silly is, oh my God, if I had to look at another Conservative MPP out in a convenience store saying they needed beer in here, I mean, that was a bit dumb and they lost a bit of credibility on all that, because I think they can make a legitimate argument to open it up. Free the beer, as I like to say.
Kathleen is in total agreement, I can tell, yeah.
Not at all. Not
beer.
at all.
She'll have a free beer.
No, and I actually don't even drink beer. But what I do believe in is actually the creation of good jobs in our province. And listen, in Ontario, the places that you can sell alcohol in Ontario has literally doubled since 2015. It's doubled because the Wynne government at the time introduced alcohol sales in our grocery stores. So now you can walk into a Loblaws, a Metro, you can get your wine and beer there.
To a certain
to a certain degree. And you know what? No new jobs were created as a result of that. Not one. And now they want to expand it to convenience stores. So they actually, Tim would like to say they want to invest in an international conglomerate. But you know what? You know what's an international conglomerate or who doesn't pay their workers well? 7-Eleven, Couche-Tard, Max Milk. These are not high-paying jobs. These people are not necessarily trained to the same level as beer store workers that actually look for safe server, like safe sip. They look to check ID. They ensure that there's not inebriation or people aren't being overserved. They keep our roads safe by ensuring that in our communities. And they also employ 7,000 workers. So that are good paying unionized jobs. So I have a huge concern because overnight, Doug Ford essentially wants to triple the number of places that you can buy beer and wine in our communities. And frankly, no one is clamoring for this. There is not one person in this country, and this doesn't even go...
That's not accurate, actually.
I don't know how any of us can claim I know how many people support it.
Okay. But on the hierarchy of needs, if we go back to the hierarchy of needs, like this is not, let's do a focus group of Ontario voters and how many even places in their top 15 of issues. Sorry?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I just don't think it's there. And more than that, there's an environmental issue to this. The beer store is the only store that actually takes back and does that recycling and has been doing so and mandated to do so for years now. You're not going to see the same level of recycling happening at your local 7-Eleven.
I feel like, Aaron, there are two debates here. One is over the merits of the contract. The second is over what the government is doing here, and that's what the chambers of commerce are responding to, which is essentially deciding to break that contract and then introduce legislation that would protect itself from paying any kind of penalty for doing so. And the message they're saying that sends to business overall.
Yeah, and it's hard to know whether that really sends a huge message to business necessarily. I think the risk for the Ford government more so is just sort of an impression or an implicit argument that, or an idea that this government is sort of running roughshod a bit and sort of a bull in the china shop, breaking things that don't need to be broken. I think there's a secondary risk, which is that this feels like the third or fourth beer-related announcement from this government. And I wonder at what point that starts, again, to kind of reflect on them, where the public starts to go, why are we talking about this again? Why is this such a big deal? Are there other things they could be talking about? I don't doubt that there are I don't doubt that there are significant retail politics, no pun intended, advantages here for them. But at some point, I wonder whether this preoccupation and this sort of tumult over implementation starts to reflect back on them.
Final word to you, David.
Well, actually, I think the contrary. I think he wants the issue. He wants a wedge. He wants to talk. He wants to ignite. He wants to fight. He wants to reignite Ford Nation. Yep. He wants. Remember when he campaigned? One of his rare campaign promises was a buck of beer, and it was about and he scrapped he did the same thing with the cap and trade system. He scrapped it regardless of the legal consequences, regardless of the cost, and he scored points with his supporters. So he's so down in the polls right now. I really think he's trying to go up against the establishment and score points with his core particular constituency.
David's totally right. He totally wants this fight. He wants it right now. But what Ontarians need to realize is that Ontario has one of the lowest in Canada pre-tax beer prices already. Like the lowest. And when provinces like Alberta in 1994, when they went the kind of corner store route, guess what? The price of beer went up. So it's like, it's actually not going to be, it's just about the political fight. David is completely right. He wants to rumble, and he's getting that rumble.
Tim, quick final word to you.
Yeah. Well, there is a small business argument too. Most craft brewers don't have the same shelf space, for example, in the beer store. These are lots of small business in communities. They employ people too. They're good jobs. They're tied into farms. They're tied into restaurants and the like. They just want the same opportunity. And to David's point, that's good politics if it plays the right way for Doug Ford.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you so much to the Power Panel, David Ertel, Tim Powers, Kathleen Monk, and Aaron Wary. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.